Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this afternoon's APM webinar, Being Chartered at 25, How I Did It, with Hazel Jell. My name's Robert Allen, I'm APM Branches Manager, and I'll be your host for today. It's great to see so many people join us, and I hope this finds you all well. Please be aware this webinar is being recorded, and you're on listen-only mode. But that's not to say we don't want your involvement today. Please feel free to submit your questions via the main control panel, and time dependent at the end, I will put these to Hazel. This session will count towards your CPD and should last no more than 1 hour. I would personally like to say thank you to the volunteers from the APM branches and the APM SIGs for all their efforts with arranging these webinars. So, Hazel Jell, chartered at 25. Hazel is a business systems project manager at Sir Robert McAlpine and attained chartered status aged 25. So on that note, I'll pass over to Hazel.
Thank you, Robert. And first, thank you to APM for having me today, and thank you to everybody who's joined us. So I'm sure over the last few months, I've got used to seeing articles like this. As Robert mentioned, I became the youngest chartered project professional. Slightly weird few months, not kind of fitting with the year. So today we're going to talk a little bit about my career so far, how I've got to where I am, why I decided to go for chartered, and then my tips for going through your application process, the interview, and a bit about your career development. And hopefully we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. So my career goes back to 2015, and how did I actually come to work in projects and specifically in IT? I graduated from Coventry University with a degree in history in 2015, and I didn't actually have a clear direction of where I wanted to go, what was I going to do. I was recommended for a short-term job with Sir Robert McAlpine as a business systems assistant in that year, and they're embarking on significant change. So it was a great opportunity for me to get stuck into something new and explore the opportunities. So during my time in that role, I worked with different teams within business systems. I worked across the wider company and with consultants. I got an insight into opportunities and learning from technical teams, from project managers. All of these things kind of came together, and I was able to look at the construction industry as well as the IT industry and gain some really crucial skills and knowledge that helped me ever since. So I was able to learn in those systems we were using and grow my role from that assistant, where I was mainly testing SharePoint and application developments, to take on a bit more of the management, working closely with the development team in their Agile and Scrum processes. So after a few months of doing that, I was able to take on an opportunity to become a trainee project manager. So that led me into 2016. During that time, I was learning every day, as I still do in my projects. I had a variety in what I do. So I could be working with developers on building an application in the morning and then planning hardware upgrades and rollouts across construction sites in the afternoon. I learned my skills through a mixture of learning from my project management colleagues, on the job with my own projects, and through classroom training when I did my Prince 2 certificates. As a trainee, I was lucky enough to experience a wide range of projects. So I worked with a colleague on the implementation of a new payroll system. I led the migration of a mobile phone provider and upgrade of mobile devices in the company. And most importantly, the first project I took on actually failed. So that project was one I picked up as part of the ongoing strategy, and it was to deliver a bespoke external contacts directory to replace functionality that existed in legacy systems, and we wanted to integrate with newer systems. We got the development of the system to a point of a proof of concept, but at that stage there was disagreement over certain features and functionality and requirements, and at that point I failed to bring the right people together to agree it, and ultimately the system was abandoned as other projects became priority. And obviously at the time it was really disappointing to see, one, the work get wasted and not get implemented, but also to fail on that first thing. But actually, when I look back at that now, I realise how much I've learned from that. Stakeholder engagement is one of my key skills now, and I'm keen on getting the right people in the room to make those decisions early. So it shows that just because something may have failed the first time doesn't mean it's always going to be that way. And it's a great platform to learn from. So since 2018, once I did my Prince 2 qualifications, I became a business systems project manager. But from there, the learning certainly hasn't stopped. I've continued to take on new types of projects, including our first in-house application, tendering for new solutions, a PC replacement program, and recently implementing information security tools. So each project comes with its new challenges and new learning curves. It might be a new team, there might be new processes, stakeholders, integrations, so many complexities that it throws up that there's learning every single day. And through that learning is how I'm able to do my chartered. And I've often actually been managing multiple projects at the same time, which has just added to that knowledge and skills and experience I've been able to develop relatively quickly. So why did I want to go for chartered? So I wanted to develop myself and my learning as a project manager and demonstrate my progress that I've made since I've taken on that trainee role. I found that it was a really good opportunity to actually reflect on what I'd learned and what I'd done in that time, the successes, the failures, the places where I now realise I could have improved in the past. And I think actually it gave me confidence in my own abilities to look back at what I had done and realise those achievements rather than just moving on to the next project as we often do. It's also really good independent recognition for myself and my skills, and also for the company and the department to have a chartered project professional. And it's a really good benchmark and just sets you up for what next in your career, what next you need to develop, and also identifying if there is any gaps, anything you want to progress on more, any specific areas that you perhaps want to move your career towards. And I've also proved that the age and the length of experience shouldn't be a barrier. So believe in your skills and experience. And if you're involved in delivering projects, have a look at the criteria and see what you can tick off. And perhaps get a colleague or a manager to help you go through that too and identify that. And actually, if you want to give it a go, you can give it a go, no matter how many years it's been. So I'll move on to my tips for actually building your application. I found that the first and most important thing was reviewing that criteria carefully. Have a look through the competencies and work out which of your projects can fulfill each competence. And think about the technical criteria for the competencies too, because you have to be asked about that in your interview. So you need to be confident on both sides of it. And then fill in the gaps. So when I first looked at the Chartered Project Professional back in about 2018, there was areas that I knew I couldn't fulfill at that point. So I identified what those were and asked to be able to fill those gaps in from projects I was then going to take on. So one example of that was budget management. I knew that I didn't have much experience of that yet, so I asked for my next project. I wanted to take that on, and I was able to fulfill that gap quite quickly by asking for what I needed and knowing where I wanted to develop myself. And also pick your best projects. So have a think about what projects fulfill most of the criteria. You can have a maximum of 4. So work out, do you want 4 projects, or actually do you only want to use 1 or 2 that cover multiple of the competencies? So I used 2 projects, which gave a good split and a balance between the requirements of those 2. But I meant I didn't have to remember about 4 projects when I got to the interview. And also think about which of those projects taught you the most, because it doesn't have to have been a successful project to use it in your chartered application. So long as you've learned something from it and you can demonstrate those skills and the competence, you can use that project. So once you've looked at the competencies, make sure you pick your elective ones at this stage as well. Don't leave them till last. So do that before you start writing your application, because again, that can influence which projects you pick, or it might influence which gaps you want to fill with your knowledge. And then once you've done all of your selection of your projects and your competencies, make a plan. And I treated it like my own project. So make your plan of what is your deadline for submitting your application to APM, and work backwards from there. Plan the projects to use for each competence, and then stick to your plan of writing it. What order do you want to write your competences in? When do you want to get each one done by? And that leads on to the next one of your milestone. So do you want to set a date for when your project overviews are written, and then set a date for when you've done 3 of your competencies, and so on, to make sure you meet your milestone? We're all about planning. We're all used to planning our milestones in our projects. So I found that a really useful way to do that in my application as well. And finally, probably the most difficult one that people find is to actually make time for it. Build time into your working day, into your weekends, whenever it works for you, but make sure you set that time aside and stick to it. Because if you don't make the time, then you won't complete the application. I found that I did over half of my written application at the beginning part of the year, and then I was furloughed. And that could have had pros or negatives for me. But I made myself stick to a routine. I set aside a certain amount of time every single day to complete my written application. And so it's about working that into what you're doing. And whether you want to write it over a longer period of time or a shorter period of time, working out what fits you and sticking to it. Also, consider starting your CPD log early, because if you don't start your CPD log, that's when you might be rushing doing that at the end. If you get it up to date, you'll get in the habit of doing it, and then it won't become a chore later on. So preparing for your interview. I apologise because I've just lost my notes on that one. So again, on this one, I decide on a time frame that works for you. Once you've done your written application and you get your you do your written application, you get your successful email back on that one, you've got up to 12 months for when you want to take your interview. So it might be that actually you prefer to wait longer, whether it be personal situations getting in the way, or whether you just prefer more time, or you might prefer actually to do it relatively quickly. Personally, I decided that I left myself about a month between the two, so that I had time to revise some of the stuff and to refresh my memory, but I didn't want to forget what I'd written about and have to go back to it later on. So make sure you pick a time frame that works for you and get that interview date booked so you've got something to work towards. Found the second thing is the revision, and that the revision is key. For some people, it's quite a while since we've perhaps done revision before. For others, it's not. But everything you need to know is the technical competencies are there, but all of the information isn't in the APM Book of Knowledge. So you do have to do a bit of your own research and make sure you're comfortable with each of those technical criteria that you could answer them if you ask questions on. Remember, there's 12 competencies and you're going to be asked technical questions about 4 of them. So you need to make sure you're comfortable, because you have no idea which 4 it's going to be until you're sat in that interview. And also think about your ethics, because you will get an ethics question, so make sure you're prepared with a few examples depending on what they might ask you. And finally, remember your application. One of the key things, it's great to get bogged down in the revision of the technical, but they'll also ask you about your application on 6 of the competencies. So if you've forgotten that bit, that's a bit where you could fall down. So both bits have to be in your head at the time. I found a really good way of doing that was to actually record myself reading out what I'd written, and then I could listen to it while I was cooking dinner or something like that, just to get it into your brain and do it at another time while you're already doing something else. And finally is to relax when you're doing your interview. So I actually found that the night before, I would normally have been thinking about public transport, where am I going to, how am I going to get there, how early do I need to go in case of delays. Whereas actually, by having the luxury of doing it from our homes at the moment, it took all of that away. So work out a routine that works for you to relax and stick to it. Don't cram revision up to the last minute and go for it, because most of us are sat in our kitchens or dining rooms at the moment doing these interviews. So just make sure you've got peace and quiet to get it done how you want to do it. And finally, a bit on your career development. So I found that I got my chartered, and then I thought, right, what's next for me? For the last few years, I've had this target that I've been working towards. So I've now started to think about what's my next target, what's next in my career. And I think when thinking about your career, it's really good not to try and think about the next 20 years at a time. Think about, maybe 2, 3, 5 years at a time, whatever works for you. And you might often get asked about 5 years at a time, but that might not be right for you. It might be right just to think about the next 2 years. What's that next milestone you want to aim for? But always have something that you're looking towards if you want to develop in your career. And remember that only you know what's right that works for you. And identify your goals. So work out what your goals are for your career. It could be a specific qualification, it could be moving to a specific sort of role. So if you've got that goal, you can then work out what you need to do to get there. And when you have your bigger goals, consider breaking it down into your yearly targets, your 90-day plans, and even monthly plans, so you can just work on those little bits that you need to do to reach those goals at the end of the time. And then think about what experience you need to gain. So like I said, I worked out what I needed to do to get my chartered. So when you're starting out, or whether you're chartered, just think about what it is. What are those gaps? So are there specific skills you want to develop, or areas that you know you're weaker on? Or is there a specific knowledge area or a sector that you want to grow into? And think about how you might be able to build that into your current role and gain that experience in day-to-day and what you're doing now. And then think about what opportunities are next available to you. It might be that you know what opportunities are coming up in your current role. It might be that there's a new project on the horizon that you want to take on. And so if you know you need to fill these gaps, ask to take on those opportunities and put yourself in the seat for them so that you can drive your career the way you want to go it. And build your network. So having a supportive network around you underpins all of this. So find those people inside your organisation who can directly impact your career path, and build your network outside of your organisation to find those who might be able to provide support, knowledge and other opportunities. If you don't have that network, you don't have the people to support you when you're identifying your goals and asking for the experiences and skills you need to develop. So your network is really, really important to actually gain that as you go through your career. Well, I think I flew through that quite quickly, but if there's any questions now, I'm happy to take them, and please feel free to connect on LinkedIn or reach out and ask any questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Hazel. That's a great presentation and an insight into how you became chartered. We've definitely got some lovely comments. So people have said, thank you very much for the great presentation. Someone's asked about the different routes that you can take, and what was the route or the journey that you took?
So I took route 3 because I didn't have any of the qualifications to take route 1 or route 2. So route 3 meant I had to do the written application and the interview on professional and technical knowledge. Routes 1 and routes 2 both have different options, so you might just have to do the written application or just a shorter interview than what I did. The route 3, if you don't have one of the other APM qualifications, you've got that 2-hour interview and your written application first with, like I said, up to 4 projects, 500 words, and your 12 competencies of 250 words.
Excellent. Thank you, Hazel. Just to let everyone know, in your handout section on your control panel, there's additional information around chartered, and the APM website has additional information and links to the different routes, etc. So I'm going to read this question from Hazel to Hazel. So Hazel said, thanks, Hazel, great guidance and well done. How did you go about gaining buy-in and support from your company?
So I was lucky that my company were the first ones that informed me about the chartership process. But I spoke to my managers immediately once I heard about it. And I think it's important to get in buy-in from those people who are close to you and what you do. Speak to them and ask them for what you want to aim for. because it's a good thing for you, but it's also a really good thing for your company to be able to say that they have chartered project professionals working for them and delivering their projects. So if you speak to your managers and say this is the way you want to go with it, likelihood is they'll support you in that. And also you have to have some, I can't think of the word for it now, Robert, but you have to provide kind of references with your application. So getting those people who will support you through it from day one is important. But yeah, have those conversations early on, tell them where you're wanting to go with it. And I would like to think that a lot of people would support you in that.
Yeah, no, excellent, Hazel. Yeah, you're right there. Support from your company is very important, and the end benefit to them is massive as well. Martin has picked up on one of your top tips about recording CPD, and he's asked, have you got any good approaches or methods for tracking your CPD? How did you go about doing it?
So from kind of early on, I set up my APM, my spreadsheet to track my CPD. And I kind of had a bit of a brainstorm at first of what I had done over perhaps the few months before, kind of when I was just setting it up. And filled that in, had a think around how many hours, what different things could I put in there. I find it useful to pick up maybe once a week, go through your diary and just have a think about what things you might have done that week that could count towards CPD. Obviously, things like this, is quite easy to realise that it's CPD and write it down. But it's those things we do every day, interactions perhaps with other colleagues, and just have a think back. You know, obviously at the end of a Friday is a good example of a time to do it. Reflect on the week. What have I done that, you know, is beneficial to me? And then reflect on that time and just make a note of what it was you did and your reflections and the rough amount of time. Then it's quite easy to keep on top of.
Excellent, thank you, Hazel. I've been guilty here of using an acronym, and Lizzie has made a good point. What does CPD stand for? So it's a continuing professional development. So for example, APM webinars that we hold, if they last 1 hour, that counts towards 1 hour of CPD or continuing professional development. It just shows that you're always gaining knowledge, etc. But just thought I'd quickly jump in on that one. Let's have a look. Murphy has said, great presentation, thank you. What was the most difficult obstacle that you encountered on the route to becoming chartered, and how did you overcome it?
You know, because of this year, probably one of the most difficult things was the point of being furloughed, which is probably fairly unique, but it would have been quite easy at that point to let my routine slip and not kind of stick at it. So I found throughout my best way of doing it was to kind of keep a good routine. And even when I returned to work, I was just got the result on my written part, so I then had to make sure I fitted in the revision for my interview. So I was quite clear with everybody when I came back to work that I have blocked out time, this is the purpose of it, and it doesn't get interrupted. And I think it's being very strict with ourselves on that time we set aside and making sure we actually do stick to it, because it's very easy to sit that time aside and actually slip into the emails and just answer one or two here and don't actually get that proper time to focus on what we need to. So I think it is getting that routine, setting that time aside and sharing it with people to say, this is what this time is for, and I will be doing that. I won't be answering emails during that time, or whatever it may be. I won't be answering the phone, just so that you've got those boundaries and you can do it for you.
So Hazel, taking time for these things and putting the time in really does help. And kind of a follow on from that, Helen and a couple of other people have asked, did you find the interview easier or harder to prepare for than previous exams?
I think it was harder to prepare for than previous exams, partly because it's a completely different thing, doing an interview to perhaps having an exam where you have more thought time and write and you can scribble something out and redo it if you're not happy with it. Kind of what you say first is your answer. And also finding that material, perhaps knowing that you've got to go wider than just that book of knowledge, you do have to do that little bit of research. I think I found it harder to prepare for, but I found it easier on the day than I was expecting. and the answers came more naturally and I was more relaxed. So there's kind of those two sides. I think it's that bigging it up in your own head of what it's going to be, and then actually when you do it, it wasn't actually as scary or as difficult as expected.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear, and especially your hard work leading into it certainly paid off. So Vikram has asked a further question around the CPD and says thank you for your tips about recording. Vikram has said, did you actually get queried about your CPD during the interview?
No, I didn't. But I think APM can request to see your CPD log at any point. So when you do the application or any point afterwards. So it's always good to have it up to date.
Great answer. Yeah, there's definitely a requirement to continually build your CPD and maintain a certain standard, which is great. A lot of people have said, what's next for you, Hazel? Now you're a chartered professional, what's the next aim?
So I'm still kind of working on it at the moment. What is the next thing? But I think I want to take on a bit more programs rather than projects. And I'm definitely kind of getting stuck into the project processes and change processes, that side of things, to really try and improve those and how I'm working at the moment.
So, well, we certainly wish you well with those ambitions. Charles has asked, do you need to be in employment to go for chartered status?
I don't believe you do. You need to be able to show recent experience to go for your chartered status, but you certainly don't need to be in employment. As long as you've got two people, again, I don't believe they have to be employers, to kind of give you those references if needed. But that's all you need, and you can go for it.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Hazel. Charles, there's definitely additional information on that on the APM website, which you can find from those handouts. So Elaine, hope you don't mind, Hazel, we're going back to your interview again. Can you give any examples of the technical questions that were covered during the interview stage without giving away too much?
I think a lot of the technical questions you might get asked around a hypothetical situation, and then asked what you might do if you were in that situation, around perhaps different models you might use, for example, in team management. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any of the technical questions that they asked me, but it's that sort of thing, thinking around, whereas the professional side, obviously you've got what you actually did. They might think of a different hypothetical situation to try and ask you around those technical points. But yeah, I'll try and have a think, and if you want to connect on LinkedIn, I'll try and have a look back at any notes I had from my interview and help you out.
All right, excellent, thank you, Hazel. So Lizzie's asked, how did you identify your skills gaps? Did you compare this to the chartership requirements, or is there somewhere else that you went looking?
So I used chartership requirements. So I went through each of the competencies, which I think is available from one of the handouts. And I went through it myself, and I also went through it with my manager. Kind of some bits where I wasn't sure. Sometimes it might just be the wording, thinking, do I do that? And actually, when you kind of read it 2 or 3 times, you go, yeah, I do, and making a note of what projects I thought I could fit, or just going back to these points and saying, right, I know that I can maybe fit 3 of these, but those other, to get to the 4 or 5, I'm not sure. So those are the areas I was able to highlight those and then go back to it, and I could see exactly where those gaps were, or if there was, you know, sometimes it was really obvious and sometimes it wasn't so much. And probably looking at the technical stuff is also, you know, identifying there. It might be that I could fit the professional side, but the technical side might have just needed a little bit of work to build that up. So yeah, go through that chartership criteria with you and get that peer review on it as well, just so that you can see where do you actually need to fill in those gaps.
Excellent, thank you, Hazel. I can definitely see there's a theme with some of the questions. It was about some people have asked about which route is correct for them. I'm not going to put those to Hazel if people don't mind, but I'd definitely direct people to the documents found on the APM website, which will give you some more additional information and allow you to make an informed decision. But we've had a great question from Kate, who has asked, has your employee recognised your chartered status either informally or formally, such as a wider range of projects or promotion?
So informally, definitely. And as I showed earlier on, they published it as well. Obviously amongst my colleagues and my team, everybody, everyone congratulated me. I don't think there's not been any immediate impact on different projects, but that's probably partly because the projects I was doing were not long started because I'd not long returned from furlough. So it depends what projects come up. There's a few project managers in my team, so projects come up and we all kind of tend towards certain things. So I'll definitely be, I'll push myself out there for the things I want, as I was doing before, to fill those gaps. And if there's something I think I want to learn about that project and do more in that, then I'll definitely push myself towards it. And I know that I can do that, and I'll get support from my teammates and from my managers to take on those new projects.
Yeah, I know you mentioned that some of your colleagues are probably joining us on this webinar today, cheering you on, and I hope you don't mind me sharing, when we did our test run the other week, you mentioned you're getting a lot of great contacts from people in the community, and becoming the youngest chartered has really opened up some additional avenues for you. Are you able to expand on some of those, some of the articles you've been in and the newsworthy stories?
So it has. It's one of those things. I think I said to Robert when we went for our test run last week, that you see it happen to other people and it's not normally yourself. So kind of seeing, but yeah, there's been, APM and SRM have both done articles. There's the project magazine, this webinar, things like this cropping up, which is an unusual experience at first, but also other people reaching out on LinkedIn, with others seeing this webinar and just the other things posted by APM and Sir Robert McAlpine. So yeah, it has definitely broadened kind of myself and made myself more visible by getting that chartered.
Excellent, and we're very grateful that you've given up your time to do this webinar as well. And thank you so much for putting your LinkedIn up there as well, so people can reach out to you as well. So just having a look down the questions, it looks like we've covered the majority. I must admit there are some questions that I'd probably advise people to go and look at the APM website and look at the documentation there, rather than me posing these to Hazel. But Hazel, you started off by saying that probably, I think your first slide, you said you failed a project and this really helped you going forward. What other lessons have you learned as a project manager, just in general?
I think there's every project you take on, there's different lessons, particularly around communications is probably something recently that I'm kind of really hot on. I've had some projects that are slightly more difficult to communicate, more complex, and trying to work out the best ways to get that across to people, making sure that it's in a way that people can take it on. It's not too lengthy, but they still get all the information that's needed. A few times where you've adjusted things to make sure, right, last one didn't really work, what can we improve for the new one? Also around who to engage for various projects. It's part of probably bedding into an organisation as well, that you're continually kind of learning and changing who is it you actually need to engage with for your projects, both at a senior level and other people. So, obviously we're on construction sites, so who are the engineers on site that I need to engage with to get the right experience and the right requirements to mean that it will actually work for the people who are going to be using whatever we deliver. Yeah, the engagement came, they came from the first failure, but it comes from every single one. There's the processes we follow. I think every step you learn a bit about the process and a bit about how you can improve it, whether that be in terms of your documentation or how we're holding meetings with our project teams. Every single one, there's probably little tweaks and changes I make as I go, yeah, that didn't really work last time, or this thing really did work. I'm finding recently, especially with everybody working from home more, that a meeting every week, even if it's only half an hour long for each project, just really helps keep everybody involved, the stakeholders, the people delivering the project, keep everybody together, get decisions made quickly, so that you can keep the momentum and keep it moving rather than having to wait for people to respond.
Excellent. Yeah, communication at this time is, well, especially 6 months ago, was certainly tested, and all the different platforms we now find ourselves talking to our laptops a lot more. But yeah, great. Thank you for sharing. And I suppose the final question for myself is, how long do you reckon you'll be the youngest chartered professional? Have you got when do you reckon your title will be taken off you?
It could be any time. Whenever APM next release the chartered results, that could have the next youngest person.
Excellent. Well, I'll send you through these comments, but there's been some lovely comments from everyone saying thank you very much for sharing your journey and taking the time to answer the questions as well. So on behalf of the APM, Hazel, I'd like to say thank you for giving up your time to give this presentation and answering the questions.
Thank you to you as well for having me, and to everyone for their questions. I hope I helped one person do their application.
Looking at the questions, and here you go, I'll just read one out. It says, "This is really inspiring me." So you've definitely encouraged one person to go and find some more. So thank you for that. And then on behalf of the APM, I'd like to say thank you for everyone who joined us today, for getting involved, submitting some great questions. As I say, I would definitely download the handouts in your control panel and go off to the APM website and find out additional information. Equally, feel free to reach out to us, and we will happily help. Please also keep an eye on the APM website for future events, and we hope to see you soon. Keep well. Bye for now.